So good morning, everybody, and welcome to the last session before lunch. But I can guarantee this is going to be a very, very exciting session. I think we've got an esteemed panel here who really represent a very broad representation of the advanced therapy market. Everything from regulators, working with the EMA, to company representatives, to patient representatives. And really what we're looking to explore today is what are some of the new innovative pathways towards accelerating patient product registration. So I'm really, really excited. And what I'm going to ask each of the panelists to do is just to briefly introduce themselves, where they're from, their company, and their main area of focus, and then we'll get stuck into the questions. As they're talking, I would ask you to please think about some trying and testing questions, because we've got an enormous amount of experience here, and this is really your chance to ask all those questions you've been dreaming about for all these years. So, Lorcan, if we can start with you.
So, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this esteemed panel. So, my name is Lorcan Allen. I am a European Director for Regulatory Affairs with BioMarin. So, BioMarin is a company that was set up about 20 years ago in California, north of San Francisco. The primary focus of BioMarin has been to focus on rare diseases, in particular with the particular emphasis on the pediatric orphan conditions, and this is reflected in our pipeline and our approved products. So presently, BioMarin has 6 approved products, 4 in enzyme replacement therapy for a number of the MPS conditions, but we also have a treatment for phenylketonuria, and one that slightly sits outside of our normal remit, which is for Eaton-Lambert syndrome. Within our development portfolio, we're very excited because we reflect both the past as well as the future. So we have a treatment for PKU, which is coming through. It's been filed in the US and looking to file soon in Europe. We have another treatment coming through for MPS IIIB, which we're very excited about. One I'm particularly involved with and very excited about is BMN 111. This is called vosoritide. This is for the treatment of achondroplasia, entering into phase 3. Just got a PIP approved from the EMA, which we're very pleased about. And then I think for the focus of today, representing probably the future, as most of you are interested in here with advanced therapies, is BMN 270. This is our gene therapy, an AAV5 vector-based gene therapy for the treatment of hemophilia A. We received PRIME eligibility back in last March. We recently received FDA breakthrough designation following on from our successful IND application. This is in a phase 2 setting, about to embark on our phase 3 program, so really excited.
Great, thank you very much. Anne?
Yeah, hello. So my name is Anne Dupraz Poiseau, and I am Chief Regulatory Officer at Orchard Therapeutics. So Mark just presented Orchard Therapeutics, a young company incorporated in 2015 and specialized on ex vivo gene therapy for rare conditions. Our pipeline include primary immune deficiency and inherited metabolic diseases. And our lead program is on ADS-KID, so ultra-rare disease condition. We do have offices in EU and in the US.
Great, thanks, Anne. Jordi?
Okay, good morning. I'm Jordi Llinares Garcia. I'm the current head of Department for Scientific and Regulatory Management at the agency. I've been working in rare diseases for the last 10 years before I took this job. And I guess one of the focus for me today to be here is because I've been leading the development of PRIME at the agency. So it's a scheme to really get good advice, regulatory and scientific, on priority medicines.
Great, thank you very much. So, Peter?
So for me as well, I'm at the European Medicines Agency, Peter Richardson. I'm head of quality. I've been doing that for about 4 years. Prior to that, I was head of biologicals section, also with focus on quality and quite close links with Biologicals Working Party. I've worked at MHRA prior to that, and also in industry, which is beginning to fade from my memory, but I was there at one point. So I've got a feel for some of the pressures on the industry side as well. At the moment, I cover all molecules, but also have a focus as well on the advanced therapies. Thank you.
And Chris?
Good morning. My name is Sotirelis. I'm a patient representative, and I'm a patient with thalassemia, which is a rare inherited blood disorder. I have been involved with regulatory affairs and have been a patient expert on the EMA, and I'm currently, since late 2013, I have been an observer in the Committee for Advanced Therapies. I have also taken part in several EMA/HTA joint scientific advices and protocol assistance for a number of products. I'm also involved in on the HTA side with scientific advice and general discussions with HTA authorities in the UK, such as NICE, as well as the MOCA, which is the Mechanism of Coordinated Action, which is a pan-European collaboration and discussion group between European payers, patient representatives, and industry. I am affiliated to EURORDIS, as you can see, and I'm also a past Vice President of the UK Thalassemia Society in North London.
Great, thank you very much. See what I told you? These guys are amazing. So get those questions ready. So Peter, let's kick off with you, if we may. And I'm going to ask you to frame some of the EMA access schemes that are currently in development. What are the legal tools behind them, and how do you see them? And can you just lay them out for us?
Okay, well, I think we'll probably be leading a little bit more into Jordi's bigger expertise on Prime, but essentially the agency's been working with developers for many years now. It's probably 10 years, as you all know, since the original regulation. I think what's happened is that the experience has been consolidated over that time. There's been a little bit of an interface at times with the member states in terms of their own competencies. Clearly, the agency with the ATMPs takes all of those products through the centralized procedure, but we're not necessarily dealing with the clinical trial authorizations or other aspects that are still at a member state level. So we need to feed some of those experiences through and develop a coordinated converged approach, let's say, on a European level. But clearly a lot of these products will be coming in as orphans, or they've got a high unmet need, so there's a pressure to get them into the system. I think the Prime proposal that we're working with now has received quite a lot of ATMPs. I think of the designated products, I think you confirmed, Jordi, about 50% of those are actually ATMPs, so there's quite a strong focus in that area with the ATMPs. I guess what we're trying to do is find ways to integrate awareness of what the agency does at a European level, and maybe pull up people's experience from a member state level to be able to absorb how the network can facilitate everybody, and to get entry points where you can find access to the next step forward. So ultimately, it's become a bit of a mantra, but early engagement with the regulatory agency is a fundamental aspect. And particularly here, I think, you've got situations where and from the quality side, that the unmet need puts quite a lot of pressure on maybe getting an authorization early. But there's a physical amount of things you need to do in terms of getting a development started and to a commercially acceptable stage. So this is what we're trying to do, is facilitate the understanding of how to get into the system and to do that. So what we've got, as many of you probably have worked with, as scientific advice. That's clearly one way to get a clearer regulatory position. It could be at a national level or the agency's scientific advice. But it could be maybe more for companies who've got a fairly good idea of where they are and what they want to do in terms of development. They're fine-tuning their approach. So we're thinking about going a little bit back earlier than that. So we have support for SMEs. And next week, actually, there will be a workshop for SMEs, which is also particularly focusing on the evolution of the European Innovation Network. So you may or may not have heard of that, but if you want to follow that, it is available as a broadcast next Friday. And it covers quite a lot of things overlapping with what we're talking about here. So it might actually enhance a little bit more detail in terms of what we're looking at today. So go to the agency website or pick me up. I'll be here just for lunch probably. And then we can steer you in the right direction. So there, what's happening there is at the agency itself, we have an innovation task force. It's been around for some time. It's trying to be a sort of an entry point for companies to say, okay, well, this is what we're doing. What do you think we should do? It could be looking at things like classification. Often becomes an important first step to know whether my product is an advanced therapy or it will be something else. It could eventually be a device, which is not directly the competence of the European Medicines Agency. So that kind of thing can be looked at clearly, and we've had many, I think, over the years, over 200 or more classification procedures. That will be part of the overall innovation network, and what that's trying to do is pick up the local member states' innovation offices and integrating them in a way that information is shared, and then perhaps you might feel a bit more comfortable going to your local member state office rather than coming to the European agency initially, but ultimately the early engagement is the key thing to do there. So that's a developing feature of the network, I think. And again, it's looking at the interface of what the agency can do at a centralized level versus bringing a facilitating role to coordinate the member states into the system and try to give a convergence as well of experience that we have. One specific procedure that we have, which is used a little bit more now, is called a certification procedure. So what a company, SME, would be able to do is to come with a very early package, and it's able to deliver that package to the agency for an assessment. So it's an assessment which is not predicating whether the product is provable or not, but it's basically stating that what you're doing at this time is moving in the right direction, and there is a degree of regulatory support for the development package that you've embarked upon. And that eventually receives a certificate, so it will be endorsed then by the agency, and that is something which I hope is useful to investors. I'm not sure quite how much feedback we've had on that in terms of the value of the certification, but that was certainly the intention, and I hope it will grow further over time. So those things are already in place, as I said, and the main aim for us is to try and build the appropriate channels to communicate. For the SME office itself and its workshop next week, there's also quite a valuable user guide on the agency website. So that, again, is one of the tools which, if you're unfamiliar with what you're embarking on or getting into, it sets out many of the things that you're likely to encounter in terms of the development. And again, hopefully that will take you to a point where you've got a coordinated, strong position about how to go forward. You can embark on scientific advice, or you could apply to get prime status. And as I said, from our side in Europe, we've done more on the ATMP side perhaps than maybe FDA have done for breakthrough, but it's certainly an area where the unmet need is strong, and I think from this conference you can see in some cases the results are very impressive, and there is a clear unmet need to get these products into the system.
Great. So that's perfect. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Peter. So Prime, you mentioned a couple of times. So Jordi, I'd love you to briefly dive into Prime, give us a bit of an overview of Prime, and specifically how ATMPs have fared within Prime and how you see that moving forward.
Thank you. So yes, Prime is a scheme that we launched about 1.5 years in Europe, and it follows really the good experience of the breakthrough designation in the States. So basically, we were trying to see how can we have a system that really concentrates regulatory and scientific support to promising products, priority medicines, that's what Prime stands for, and then how the network can go behind those products in order to have an excellent package for marketing authorization, so that can facilitate accelerated assessment. So that's basically the concept. And in Prime, we don't invent anything, but we put together the effort to facilitate scientific advice, very proactive from our point of view, to have a kickoff meeting with the company in order to flag them what are, from our side, I would say, the regulatory hurdles or scientific hurdles that they will have to address during development, and also really to have a very good coordination through our committees, because, I mean, we have to recognize that we are not easy to deal with, so the regulatory kind of system is not easy. It's you know, many interactions with different committees, different steps, so we try really to give there a good coordination role, and that is also focused on a single entry point at the agency, so we have a single coordinator for each prime product. So far, we have had quite a success in terms of ATMPs in Prime. We have had 131 applications for Prime in 1.5 years. Of those, around 20% were successful. So we have currently in the system 31 products designated for Prime. As you can see, it's quite a high attrition rate. That means really when a product is Prime, you have really the regulatory label of promise there. So that's a product really where the regulatory network wants to really invest in terms of assessment support. Of those ones, we have had, from the 131, 30% were ATMPs. But what is more interesting is that of all positive products, 45% are ATMPs. So almost half of the 31 products are ATMPs. That was initially a bit of a, I wouldn't say a surprise, because we were expecting this to be very attractive for ATMPs, because we know that advanced therapies are complex products in terms of development, but also regulatory approach. But we are really happy to see this very high uptake of the system. Just briefly, let me mention also in terms of approval schemes, conditional and accelerated, because as I said before, Prime thrives really to get a good package at the end of the day, to have a very smooth assessment, hopefully under an accelerated assessment circumstances. What accelerated assessment means? What accelerated assessment means is that when we have really a recognition that the product really provides a major therapeutic advantage for patients, we are able or willing to shorten the assessment time for that product. In terms of 210 active days, we'll do it in 150 days. So basically, it's a bit more than 3 months assessment time, active assessment time. That would include a clock stop of a month, but that's it. So that means that from the beginning, we need really very good quality data for the assessors to go through the assessment. Another way to put products on the market, which is also accelerated in a way, is the conditional marketing authorization, which really recognizes also the benefit of putting the product on the market as soon as possible. But in terms of dealing with the shorter, I would say, assessment process, what we are willing is to commit in a way on the package that initially we accept for authorization. And basically, we are recognizing that the data is enough for a positive benefit risk, but still we wait for some post-marketing authorization data to be submitted to complement either safety or efficacy of that file. And that is what is put together in the opinion as commitments post-marketing authorization. That's a very high level, but I hope it clarifies.
Great, thank you very much. So, Lorcan, I'd like to move to you now, and because BioMarin, as you've already mentioned, recently had a program accepted into Prime. So from an industry perspective, can you give us kind of some of the highs and lows from your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Prime program came at a very opportune time for BioMarin. We had just begun the BMN 270 program when Prime was announced. And you know, we weren't sure if we would be eligible for Prime. We weren't sure what the level of data that would be required to be entered into Prime, because proof of concept data was the statement. So there was a little bit of what do we do, how do we approach it, and as it progressed, we learned more from some other companies, which came around the time where we had what we felt was proof of concept data or very exciting data for which we should see or gain access into the Prime scheme. It also came about at the same time, of course, when you gather proof of concept data, you're thinking about your scientific advice, the full development program, what are your regulatory strategy for marketing authorization, etc. So there was a convergence there of, do we go for scientific advice, do we go for Prime? And in actual fact, we felt there was a good synergy in potentially going for both at the same time. Whether we'd be successful at Prime, we still had scientific advice, but should we not be successful at Prime? Sorry, we had scientific advice, should we be successful? We had the two systems in place. The difference was that we were unclear about all the timings regarding Prime, because Prime, as Jordi has said, it brings together a lot of people, a lot of experts, but that requires, of course, meeting coordination and timelines. So when these actual activities would happen. But needless to say, we felt that if it happened somewhere during the scientific advice process, it would be beneficial and give us, to some extent, an added chance to discuss with the regulators. And fortuitously, that's exactly how it happened. We had a standard scientific advice engagement. We presented the questions, and we got some great feedback. The difference with Prime was, as Jordi said, it's a way of the EMA, and there is a template that they provide, to really critically look at your program, both up to marketing as well as post-marketing, and for them to highlight to you what they think might be some of the issues for discussion, as well as you having the opportunity to also explore some issues. And I would also say, and this is our personal experience, the people that we had in the room with Prime were really engaged about Prime. We're really there to support the rapid development. So there was a wider body involved with scientific advice, and it was a more standard. But I think the added benefit of Prime was that real engagement to discuss and explore the issues, and give us that opportunity, as I said, to really engage about what would be the most critical issues with respect to rapid development. Now we're 6 months on from that kickoff meeting, and we're again thinking about how we use Prime with respect to maybe coming back to the agency for a discussion. Prime also, they asked maybe you give them an update, so we're going to be giving an update very shortly with a view to then further interactions. So that's where we are in the process. But the Prime scheme for us, another high, and I think you allude to, it promotes accelerated assessment. Very critical is, for ATMPs, the difficulties of managing that 1 month clock stop. So one of the advantages we see for our product on Prime is this engagement with the dedicated rapporteur throughout the development process. And also, before we come to marketing authorization, we understand that we will have more engagement with our rapporteur, such that we can iron out all of, or most of, we hope, these issues, such that we can have a smoother path through. So we're not there yet. We will greatly appreciate to hear the experiences of companies that might be further in the process or closer to that marketing authorization stage, to see how that interaction with the rapporteur has progressed. But for us, the actual Prime has been extremely beneficial, and we look forward to engaging again with the rapporteur in the next scientific advice.
Great, thank you. So we'll open it up in a few moments. So if any of you do have experience and you'd like to share, that'd be great. So Anne, I'd love to come back to you, because from an Orchard perspective, you went a slightly different direction, and you were recently granted Promising Innovative Medicine status under the Early Access for Medicine scheme in the UK. Can you talk us through that, and what drove your decision to go down that route as opposed to any of the others, and what has your experience been?
Yeah, thank you. So actually, as explained, Orchard Therapeutics was incorporated in 2015, and we licensed, data from, very compelling data from 2 academic centers, UCL here in London and UCLA in Los Angeles. And our first action were actually to leverage, very good relationships that this academic center had with regulatory authorities. So we do have breakthrough therapy designation in the US, and for UK, we pursue what is called, promising innovative medicine designation. What it does bring to us, it's first, acknowledgement of potential of positive benefit risk for our lead program in ADS kit. And second, it gives us access, also to HTA bodies here in the UK. So meaning PIM is the first step in what is called early access medicine scheme here in the UK. So we had very close collaboration and discussion with MHRA during the assessment of the PIM, and we were able to discuss with them, our development plan and how to accelerate it. And with this designation, actually, we do have also access, to the HTA bodies in the UK, and possibility to discuss, the common journey between regulatory and market access, for the UK. And maybe if I may go a little bit beyond of PIM, we does not exclude, prime. So, and in the framework also of Brexit and being, placed in UK, it was quite important also for us to have this connection, very close engagement and connection with MHRA. As I just said before, we do have also breakthrough therapy designation, which is, as Jordi explained, the parallel of PRIME in the US. And from our experience, it's so important, to have this early engagement with the regulator. And in particular, with this development of ATMP, where cross-function are a key criteria for success, where you can discuss, CMC, non-clinical, clinical, and how to bring something together in order to show a favorable risk-benefit. It's so important that having early discussion with regulator, but also with HTA body, is important. So that's why from our experience with breakthrough therapy, we got very, early engagement from FDA. We were able to have access to multiple agency meetings with involvement of senior staff at the FDA level, which help us a lot putting together, a robust proposal for data set, that will be needed for the filing. And as Mark Rotera, our CEO, just alluded before, thanks to this early engagement, we were able, in 2 years, to define what will be the way forward, to BLA filing. And as developer, we do hope that PIM and also PRIME could help us achieve this as well.
Great. So, Chris, last but not least, patients are at the center of everything we do as we develop ATMPs. It's absolutely critical, and especially with many companies in the rare disease space. Yeah. So can you talk us through how well you think we're doing and where you think patients and patient organizations have got the most to offer in terms of getting these therapies through as rapidly as possible?
Well, of course I can, and I'm very happy that over my years of being involved as an advocate, a patient advocate, I have seen growing awareness that patient voice and patient perspectives are very important over all the product development cycle. And since we're talking about regulatory issues, I'm also very happy that the EMA has been very proactive and very sensitive to patient voices, and has made considerable efforts to include patients in all its activities. So patient representation within the EMA is not only within the individual committees, where individual positions are reserved for patients, which are mandated through the European Commission, and nominations are done that way, but also there are other patient opportunities for involvement and perspective to be highlighted and included in the other areas, such as scientific advice, joint scientific advice, protocol assistance, and then again, these are the patients. Perhaps they might be different types of patient advocates. For instance, in scientific advice, you need the patient expert who are experts on the particular disease, whereas the patients that are embedded in the committees, who sit in the committees, have got a more scientific view, a more holistic view of overall, and have to understand also the regulatory process, the approvals, the risk-benefit ratio analysis, and all the rest of it. But what is the real role of patients? And the patients are there inside the regulatory agency as a way to, first of all, understand and comprehend what are the main issues, the substance of the activities, and of the discussions and the deliberations of the committees, and to be able to include their perspective, which is sometimes different to what the experts will consider should be the patient perspective. And when I'm saying this, what I'm talking about is that on many occasions, particularly when we're talking about product development for rare diseases, patients have got a different perspective and assessment and evaluation of risk, of tolerability of risk, how far they are prepared to go, of what they are willing to forego in terms to have earlier access, particularly if there are no other products available. Also to give a good awareness to the experts about what is the real unmet clinical need, what are the real issues regarding the standard of care, the comparisons between severities or potentially different types of population within the overall indication, needs to stratify, to advise about areas of potentially clinical design, such as what are meaningful endpoints or clinical outcomes that are desired that will make an impact and a difference to the patient, the quality of life issues. So all of that forms part of a bigger kind of spectrum of expertise and advice, which is, I think, unique to the patient perspective. And luckily, increasingly, this is becoming more and more embedded in the activities and the regulatory processes.
Great, thank you very much. And I think this is something we can't overestimate, is the importance of patients, because at the end of the day, we spend all these years and all this money developing therapies for patients. The least we should do is ask them how well we're doing at it and how much of a difference it makes to them. So, it's great to see the EMA taking these initiatives. Okay, so now I'm going to move on and ask, does anybody have any burning questions for the panel at this stage?
I think that we see a chicken and the egg thing emerging, greater elucidation on the regulatory side, both in Europe and the United States, a lot of evolution and progress, increasing certainty, in some cases speed to marketplace, more iterative dialogue in this area, counterpositioned against a payer that's looking for that longer-term evidence. How do you see crossing that bridge? Is it parallel review? Is it more innovative ways to look at real-world evidence? Are you seeing for the ATMPs coming through, or as a manufacturer, are you thinking parallel reviews so that you, as early on as possible, begin to get a view for how to demonstrate that long-term value proposition?
Anyone want to volunteer at that? Go ahead.
So you're mentioning parallel review, regulators, HTA payers, not with the FDA, yeah? Okay, no, fine. Yes, that's, sometimes we talk about access to patients from the regulatory point of view, and that's a fallacy because we are not the determining factor for access to patients. There's other people in the room that have also something to say very importantly after we have the regulatory approval. And we are conscious of that. There's been a huge amount of work trying to build bridges with those professionals that will have a look at the marketing authorization afterwards and will really try to assess, okay, what's the cost compared to the benefit, no? Not only benefit risk as we do. And we have so far, I think, progressed a lot in the last maybe 5-7 years. These were two worlds totally apart. We didn't even know each other. And now we have joint actions, from the Commission. We have a lot of parallel advice going on in Europe with HTAs. I think that has been a brilliant, really, progress on that. We're not there yet because I think also the situation in Europe is complex because of the national competences at that level. But again, you have seen before also that there are a number of initiatives in Europe where member states are going together because basically the sustainability of the health system is at risk sometimes, as we have had recently some cases. And we are very conscious, I think, both HTAs and drug regulators that, particularly for ATMPs, when the value for the patients is so high, when we are talking about transformative medicines, this transition between regulators and HTAs has to be as smooth as possible. And we are working on that. In fact, that's probably not a secret, but yesterday we had a bilateral discussion with the FDA, one of those regular bilaterals we have. And one of the points on the agenda was, do we have to go for parallel advice for all prime products? And then how do we integrate HTAs on that? So that's really in our agenda, and we are working for that, but it's not, delivered yet. So.
Great. Thank you very much. So, yes, go ahead, Chris.
If I may say, I agree totally with what Jordi just said, but I think overall, perhaps you're being a little bit too modest. I think generally in the last few years, the EMA has made substantial progress in terms of trying to align particularly the early regulatory data generation and design clinical trials, to align that with HTA agency requirements, and obviously joint HTA scientific advice, regulatory and HTA scientific advice helps a lot. And I think potentially one of the roles of patient representatives in the committee is also to prepare the ground for the eventuality of achieving a positive result when you come to access and reimbursement negotiations. Because at the end of the day, regulatory approval is a wonderful thing to happen, but if we don't achieve also access and reimbursement, the product is a failure because it won't reach the patients.
Yeah. Great point. Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Janet.
Could you describe a little bit more why ATMPs are overrepresented relative to their percent of applications in the percent of actual designations as prime?
Yeah, we think that, so our analysis is that these products are really complex in terms of development. Many times they are in the hands of companies with an amazing scientific background, but with little regulatory expertise. So I think when we opened Prime, I think they saw there a very great tool for them to progress on those aspects. And that has been our assessment. I think it's basically that we have really produced a tool that fits really with the needs of ATMPs, because we have seen in the past many ATMPs failing or being very slow in development, not because the science behind, but the regulatory struggle of the companies going through the system. And I think that's been, the community has received that as an opportunity.
Go ahead.
If I may, do you have, at the EMA level, do you have also the same, idea or approach that has been implemented in the US with regenerative medicine, advanced therapy designation, which give, the same advantage as breakthrough therapy, but which is given, to this dedicated, ATMP product?
Well, in terms of Prime, we are applying there a very kind of customized approach to the support that ATMPs need. And in fact, what we have done from the beginning is that we have had CAT involved, so the Committee for Advanced Therapy, sorry for the acronym. The Committee for Advanced Therapy is involved from the beginning in the assessment of the application, but also in the advice given afterwards to the advanced therapy, because basically, at the time of marketing authorization, the assessment is a joint assessment between the Committee for Advanced Therapies and the Committee for Human Medicinal Products, the CHMP. So they are all on board. And in fact, good examples of that has been that, for instance, many of the kickoff meetings, which are basically the first meeting we have with the companies once they are eligible, have been chaired by, for instance, Martina Schuder-Lenz, the CAT chair, showing that involvement. And internally also we have a great engagement with the colleagues from quality that are working on ATMPs.
So Lorcan, can I ask you, you've got product in Prime and breakthrough designation. What has your experience been with both of them, and can one learn from the other?
So we've had breakthrough designation for other products, and we experienced whether I can compare and contrast right now is not possible. We've just received the breakthrough designation. In principle and on paper, they look like they will achieve the same thing. The question is the practice, and maybe the practice is probably towards the latter end of as we come towards closer to marketing authorization. Maybe that's where the difference will lie. So ask me again, maybe in a year's time, I can give you a compare and contrast.
Go ahead, Jordi.
I guess it's something because I think we were very conscious from the very beginning when we implemented PRIME that the questions about how do you compare with the FDA breakthrough designation will come. And also I think it's for us also to also endorse some accountability to developers about, okay, can we have two leading regulatory agencies having different points of view for breakthrough and PRIME? So what we have done since maybe 1 year now, we have quarterly teleconferences with the FDA team that runs the breakthrough designation, and we share their, I would say, real-life experience in terms of the product that we receive. We basically put together the applications that they receive, that the ones that we receive, and now we are looking into the differences. If there's no convergence, why? The good news is that when there's no convergence, it's not because of scientific reasons. Normally, we have had that problem when a product came to the agency very late in terms of development time compared to the breakthrough designation, but there hasn't been really any difference in terms of the science behind or the support to the medical need, etc. Just to clarify. So.
Okay, great. So let's keep an eye and see how things are developing. So I'd like to change things very slightly. And most of you are probably aware that this year is the 10th anniversary of the pediatric regulations. I can see you all nodding because you all realize that. And to commemorate this, the EMA have put together a report that really looked at how well have the pediatric regulations worked. And they've come up with a conclusion which I'd like to read to you. They conclude that there was an increase in medicines for children in many therapeutic areas over the last 10 years, most notably in rheumatology and infective diseases. However, there's always a however. It also shows that little progress has been made in diseases that only affect children, or where the disease shows biological differences between adults and children, particularly rare diseases. Now, it doesn't talk about ATMPs, but still rare diseases which many of us are involved in. So I'd love to ask the panel, what are your thoughts and experiences about how well the pediatric regulations have worked? Does anyone want to kick off?
Maybe I'll start. So, as I said, our company is primarily focused in the orphan setting, which is challenges enough, but then they're also the pediatric, primarily for pediatrics. So we have engaged quite considerably with PDCO over the years, and it hasn't always been the smoothest of sailings. I think PDCO is always saying, come often, come early, but when you're in a pediatric rare disease setting, it's not very easy to come early. And equally, when you're trying to manage a global program between the FDA, the EMA, and maybe PMDA, it's not easy to come often either when you have to try manage these things. So there has been some challenges with respect to coming early, having that dialogue early with the PDCO and agreeing the PIP. Having said that, when we do, it is a very engaged process, and the PDCO do have, you can clearly tell, children at heart. Sometimes we're concerned about the practicalities of what they ask for, and I don't know if some of that is reflected in the difficulties that people have with developing in the pediatric space. The idea is come agree something, and when you have the evidence to prove you can't do it, then seek a modification. That's quite challenging approach to take, but nonetheless, some companies adopt that approach. Going forward with the ATMPs, I'll be very interested to see how this works. And it's not so much from the regulation, but actually more from how the PDCO operates. And I know that's being considered, and it's always under review for evolving. So right now we have 19 different legislative things or things under review by the EMA with respect to ATMPs. And I do believe maybe how the PDCO works could be also included into this, simply because as you're aware, in the ATMP space, we're constantly learning, we're constantly adapting, constantly evolving, but nonetheless, there's quite long timelines working with PDCO. We have average timelines for ATMPs of 10 to 14 months for approval. We can have challenging timelines of up to 6 months for modifications to be approved. So to deal in that space, when you're dealing with ATMPs, I think it will be quite challenging. And so I'd love to hear, and sorry to put Jordi on the spot for that, but how are we viewing the outcome of the pediatric regulation review with respect to ATMPs and the functioning of the PDCO? And maybe my colleague also has some thoughts on that.
So, and Jordi, would you guys like to chip in?
Yeah, that's probably one of the most difficult questions I can get today. But because ATMPs, so advanced therapies in children, I mean, this is if advanced therapies are really complex for adults, for children is even, more complex in terms of, the risk that you can accept, the way you develop for them. But on the other hand, sometimes the need there is massive as well. So it's so huge that I think we, not trying to be defensive, I think we lack a bit of experience still from the regulatory side to apply, those principles in terms of deciding on a PAP. It's not that PRIME will be the solution for everything, but I think this will be one of the areas in which we can put together all committees and try to address those issues in order to, have a better interaction internally, in order also to liaise with patients and understand, what the risks we can accept, etc. Interestingly enough, in fact, one of the successful ATMPs is for children, no? The one that we have in Europe, Sotirelis. But I think we still need a bit more time to really fine-tune that. I accept that hasn't been really a success story, but I think with effective products, we'll put together all the regulatory effort for making this smoother. Yeah.
Great. So, Anne and Chris, I'm going to ask you guys, what messages would you give to the EMA and the PDCO to make your ability to develop for patients easier, simpler, better, safer?
Yeah. I do think from our point of view, having development focusing on pediatric disease and rare pediatric disease, and also taking maybe comparison with what we experience also in the US, one of our wish will be really to have Scientific Advice Working Party Committee together with PDCO in order to get an aligned view without having to do two procedures, and these two procedures cannot be done in parallel, so it's one after the other, so meaning increase the time, to have clarity about consolidated EMA feedback. And maybe the other, because it's my wishing list today, so I take profit of it. Maybe the other point is, as we have discussed in this very ultra-rare disease condition, it's very important if we have patient access, in view, to have a good understanding of the requirement from an regulatory authority perspective, and as we said as well, HTA perspective, but if we concentrate on regulatory, what will be required pre-approval and what can be provided post-approval. And also considering, pediatric patient, it's quite important to have this in mind. And maybe, even further, if EMA and FDA, could discuss this and leverage, it will be much easier for developer moving forward.
Great. Chris, what are your feelings about this whole area?
Right, okay. Well, my approach would be slightly different, actually. I would clearly try to accentuate the positives and explore the negatives. Even though the pediatric regulation is not perfect at the moment and is not working as 100% as it should, but it has provided benefits, and the numbers are there, and the 267 new meds, 43 new pharmaceutical forms, etc., and that had a knock-on effect which is positive. So it increased pediatric research and development. It has increased, the approval of pediatric medicines. It has reduced off-label prescribing and use in pediatric medicines. However, I think I would agree that perhaps not all the scientific knowledge is already there, not only from the regulatory science, but also scientific knowledge in terms of modeling and correlations and how adult treatment actually figures out in children. And I know we are in amongst a company of sponsors that are interested in developing pediatric medicines, more focused on pediatrics rather than the adults. But I think generally the main product development in the marketplace tends to be biased towards the adults, and then pediatric tends to happen almost like as a second thought. Ideally, that they should happen in parallel. And what is the method that we can find to, first of all, encourage sponsors to develop medicines for both adults and pediatrics, and also not to forget the very, very low end of the pediatrics, so the neonates, which is very, very important, particularly when we're talking about rare diseases, because most of the rare diseases are inherited and will affect neonates. Some of them, the severity is going to be very high, in which case you have to catch the patients very early at that neonatal stage, or at least very, very early in childhood. What is it that we can change? What do we need to look at in terms of the process and the procedure within the EMA and the PDCO? Could we perhaps explore a little bit more waivers and exemptions, the granting of those, how we incentivize that companies and experts to actually reduce that, and I hope that we will. The process is ongoing as we discussed, but I hope that we can really within the next couple of years we can really elicit the real issues and we can improve even further.
Great, fantastic. Thank you very much. So we're rapidly coming up to lunch, and so this is the time of the panel for the surprise question. So just to end off the panel, very, very quickly, I'd like you each just to give a very brief overview of ATMPs are developing very rapidly. The science is far outstripping our ability to actually develop medicines. Look into your crystal balls. 10 years from now, what will the rapid access and the accelerated access from a regulatory perspective look like? And Lorcan, I'm sorry, I'm going to put you on the spot and go down.
Might be easier to start. I think there's been a lot of learnings, and that's been reflected in the initiatives, either in the FDA with the ramp, the breakthrough in Europe with PRIME, but also the EMA identifying, as I said, 19 different tasks to speed this up. Within each member state, there's also issues with respect to the clinical trials, and again, we see that there's initiatives going there to improve that, and we'll have a single entry portal for clinical trials, so hopefully that'll improve clinical trials in Europe as well and the speed. I think, so while in each region there's these activities, and as Jordi has said, there's definitely more cooperation between the agencies, there's still quite large differences. And when you're dealing in, as I said, pediatric or orphan conditions, and when you're dealing with ATMPs, which are very difficult to manufacture across borders, there really needs, I think, more, in maybe in the next 10 years, an alignment between the major agencies with respect to how they approach, whether it be on the CMC side, non-clinical side, or even on the clinical development programs. And then that also to be coordinated with HTA. So if you're really talking global access to all of that to coalesce. And as Jordi said, it's taking time. We've been in this space for a long time developing ATMPs. They've gone up and they've gone down, and now they're coming back to the fore with a vengeance, I would say, and looking to be extremely promising. And so now the regulatory scene is catching up, and it'll take maybe 10 years. But I think if we can improve it in each region, but then have a coalescence between the region as well regarding this, it could really streamline this for patients.
Great. And
it was already well summarized. But maybe an additional point, how I see this in my crystal ball, might be, acquiring all, because if you think where we were, 1 year or 2 years ago, and now with all these new, approvals that have been granted recently, I do think that we will learn exponentially, and I do see in several years that we will have better understanding on what is the minimum required, for the early approval, and how to gather this continuous evidence, after the approval. And I do really recognize and thanks for all this initiative, about cross-discipline. So either within the agency, but also, regulatory agency and HTA body and both agencies across the Atlantic.
Fantastic. Jordi.
Thank you. So, crystal ball, but a bit also a wish ball. So I'm going to put a bit of spice there. So I think for me, the next years, we're going to see two big focus of great development for ATMPs. One is at the level of early engagement, where I expect to have a much more dynamic, proactive dialogue between developers and regulators. But not only regulators, this needs to be multi-stakeholder. So we're going to have more involvement of HTAs, of payers as well, because they are key here, and patients. So that is already, I think we have already good grounds for that, and that's going to evolve. There will be at some point in time, this will lead to some sort of prioritization to some extent, but I hope you will agree on that, on the principles. And then the other big focus for me is post-marketing authorization data generation through building a strong register, having done good information for the colleagues that need really to reassess that effect that we believe it will be maybe one shot, but for life, that we need to have it very strong, and also use that data even for generation of new ideas. I think that needs to be also taken into account, not only in order to inform health systems, but also even to have some engagement in future developments and new ideas generating from there. So that would be my...
Thank you. Peter, over to you.
Well, I'd probably take it from a quality perspective. Ultimately, the challenges with particularly complex products are finding ways to get a consistency within them that you can guarantee clinical results are meaningful and that they're therefore valuable to give an authorization. In some ways, it's a little bit like the growth of other biologicals over the past, and maybe even biosimilars, which I've been involved in. At the start, a degree of conservatism. Analytical technology has improved tremendously to the point that we can really visualize a lot more of the detail and very fully characterize a monoclonal antibody, to the point now that we are really basing most of the authorization of a biosimilar on the quality data, because the characterization is so powerful. We can really minimize the amount of clinical need to support the application. And I think that's probably going to be the case in rare diseases and orphans, etc., where there's a limited patient population. The amount of clinical data you can acquire is probably... It's going to be challenging on which to base a very powerful outcome. And therefore, what you have to do is you have to work upstream in terms of where you support that. And I think in terms of the analytical characterization on the ATMP side, it's already growing tremendously. But, in a few years, I wouldn't dream to imagine 10 years there'll be a biosimilar ATMP, but who knows? But the characterization will certainly grow, and I think that will support the applications and overall the sort of robustness of the package that we see.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Chris, the last word is yours, and you have about 30 seconds before we get rushed off the stage.
Thanks, Sven. I appreciate that. Well, I agree pretty much with most of what has been already said. Increasingly, there will be more emphasis and more weight in the post-marketing arena. Patients have got to be very well embedded in the re-evaluation, data generation, registry, platform, compatibility, and ensuring that we now have disease registries rather than product-based registries. That we do not lose the sight of the need to optimize the product in terms of the quality development, especially since the time before the conditional marketing authorization will mean that there will be less time for the developers to do that quite time-consuming process, and therefore quality development will have to continue after in the post-marketing stage. There will be a big change coming in terms of the new technologies, such as gene editing technologies, and that, I think, will drive regulatory science in a big way. So I would also have a message for the investors, since this is an investors meeting, that you have to keep in mind, if you want to engage in development, product development for ATMPs, that you have to go in not expecting that you're going to get a product in the market 1.5 years after prime submission or eligibility acceptance, but then you have to follow that up further down post-marketing in terms of continuing the quality improvement, the data generation, and all the other necessities, which are important not only for the regulatory, but also for access and reimbursement, because, as we said, without that, we don't have a product. The patients don't get any product.
Great, thank you very much. So I hope you all found this as interesting and engaging and as exciting as I did. So please join me in thanking my esteemed panel.